Hello and welcome to Perspectification. Stories are very powerful tools. Every now and then you hear examples, hear stories, and that make you think. That's what beautiful about these stories. They make you think. They make you draw insights. They make you evolve the way you think. But every now and then you come across stories that really make you take notice. That sometimes shock you to the core. That make you think about how your mind works and how wrong perhaps you were or we are when we deal with situations. And these have the ability to make profound impact in our lives if we were to let that impact really change ourselves. So perspectification is about collection of such stories and examples that, in my opinion, are very interesting and very useful, very fun, very interesting to make us all think about how we think differently. This human mind is a beautiful, beautiful tool. One of the finest technologies in the universe, if I may, and sort of knowing about it, challenging yourself, figuring about it more is a very interesting thing to do. I love to do it, and hopefully this conversation would help you too. So, the episode 1, the bullet hole misconception. Let me give you a quick background before I tell you more about the story. So, aeroplanes today are among the safest mode of transportation. In fact, more safer as opposed to sort of successful completion of end-to-end journeys is concerned compared to any other mode of transportation out there. But that was not the same always. During World War II, when fighter planes were being used extensively, that was one of the most dangerous profession on the planet. You'll be surprised if I say the probability of survival was almost 50%. That's flip of a coin. So if you are a pilot and making a flight during the World War II times, you could actually flip a coin and that will tell you whether you will come back alive. So that definitely is something that was not sustainable. It was a great problem worthy of being solved. So that's what they tried to do. So typically what happens, and you can imagine World War going on or any war that is going on, a plane is exposed to a lot of sort of attacks. So typically 3 parts of the plane: the fuselage, the wings, and the tails. These are parts of the plane that would typically get most damage due to enemy fire, due to bullet hits. So the team of the best, scientists, statisticians, defense experts were brought in to look at this and figure out how can we solve this problem. Okay? So what they did is what I would advise everybody to do when you're trying to solve a problem and trying to figure out an insight is collect data. Never miss that step. So this is a good visualization of painstakingly collected data. Every time a plane would come back, they will take a note of every bullet hit and collect the data. And this visualization that you see in front of you on the screen shows the parts of the plane where bullets were hit. So in fact, if you look at the data, the fuselage, the fuel system, the back of the system, multiple parts of the plane were hit, and essentially you have this view now. Next step, let's analyze the data and try and draw out insights. Before I tell you what the team thought and discussed and what concluded, let me take a pause and ask you a question. What do you think should be done based on this data? Obviously, the conclusion was that we need to find out what parts of the plane do we want to reinforce with metal so that they can better withstand these bullet hits. Now, the challenge that they are trying to balance is you cannot just reinforce the entire plane, because as the weight of the plane increases, its ability to carry fuel, the maximum distance it can travel, the speed at which it can fly, all get impacted. So you want to have the weight as less as possible, and therefore, if you want to reinforce, you want to only reinforce parts which require or which will benefit from most reinforcement. So the question to you, if you have not watched the video before, if you have not heard about this story, I would suggest you take a pause, think about it, and type out what you think are the parts which require most reinforcement given the data in front of you. Okay? So I hope you have done that. If you have not typed it down, at least thought about it. And I'll tell you what the response was. And this is a very popular story, and it is used in a lot of discussions from science to statistics to psychology in different situations. And in the vast majority of the cases, what the audience comes out is what I'm assuming, and I'm fairly sure that most of you, if not all, most of you would come with a conclusion. And the conclusion is, obviously, there are these 3 or 4 parts where you see the most bullet hits. These are the parts that you need to reinforce, perhaps proportion to the number of hits that you see. And in fact, if this is the answer that you came out with, you are in some great company. Most of the experts, scientists, defense experts, engineering folks came out with the same conclusion. So congratulations, you have a sharp mind. But then there was this gentleman, his name was Abraham Wald. He was a Hungarian Jewish statistician, and he said something which was very different. He said, no, you should not reinforce these regions. You should in fact be reinforcing every other part of the plane where you don't see a bullet hit. Is that guy crazy? No, absolutely not. There lies the real insight of the story. And that is something that we call survivorship bias. Think about this. What you see when you saw this data is the story that all the planes who came back successfully are telling you. What you are not hearing is the story or the data from the planes who could not make it. Planes who were shot down. Planes that could not survive the bullet hits. That's the beauty of the message. You have great data, and the data is right. Data is what it is. It is not interpretation, it is facts. But these planes who came back, in spite of those hits, they could survive. This means that the structure of the plane was already strong enough that it could withstand these bullet hits. It is perhaps the rest, we don't know which all, perhaps the rest, some parts of the rest of the plane where when bullet hits would have taken place, the damage would have been fatal. That's the survivorship bias that one is talking about. Simple definition before we think a little bit more about it. Survivorship bias or survival bias is the logical error on concentrating on people and things that made it some past selection process. They survived, and overlooking those that did not, because you don't have those stories. You have lack of visibility of that information of the story. And this is not just about one story. This is something that is very sort of central to way our minds work. It's a psychological construct that is built into our minds. You can't wish that away. You can't just fix something in the brain and it will goes away. That's how all brains work. You need to be aware of this limitation, this way your brain works, to break free of the survivorship bias and apply this in a multitude of other situations where the same thing happens. In fact, I want to keep this story short. I don't want this to be very prescriptive. So I'll perhaps give you one or two simple examples. But go out and study about it. Think about your life and examples. You will find 1,000 examples of things that happen in the way we all typically do it that exhibit this survivorship bias. And when you notice it, now that you have heard of the story, now that you understand this idea of survivorship bias, you will react to those situations differently. And hopefully, this will make you a more successful person. That's the purpose of telling this story. That's the purpose of this story, this series. Let me give you a couple of examples. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, all great examples of people who have created some of the greatest enterprises, and they were all dropouts, college dropouts. What does the story tell? If your interpretation is that, look, having a college degree is no guarantee of you being successful in business, you're not wrong. But if that is all the insight that you have, you are dealing with suffering from survivorship bias. You are only seeing data of all the planes that survived and thrived. What you are missing are insights, data, stories, examples of hundreds of other entrepreneurs who also dropped out but couldn't make it because you are influenced by what's in front of you. You are concentrating on people or things that made it past the selection process and ignoring the hundreds of similar examples that could not make out of that selection process. So that's very important. Let me give you a very, very simple example that I think when I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs as part of my business, when I'm looking at investment, when I'm looking at sort of helping other companies flourish, one of the things that I very often sort of face is and ask the question, hey, say, why do you think you will succeed in what you're doing? They say, look at this market that my product is trying to address. Look at this example of this company, which is the best right now. And my product has everything that they do, and in fact, more. So I'm very confident that I shall succeed. Can you see the survivorship bias here? You are seeing the data of the products and the features of the survivor who survived and succeeded. Therefore, you're benchmarking, you're drawing inferences from what should be there in the product. You're not looking at examples of perhaps dozens of other enterprises, startups, who tried to look at the same market, same space via same sort of product line, but could not succeed. It is those bullet wounds with those startups that didn't succeed that are not evidently in front of you because nobody talks about it. They hold deeper truth inside in terms of what you should not do, what you should design your products as for your probability of success to be higher. There are lots and lots of exciting stories. And as I said, I would love for you to sort of respond. Come back with stories, examples, things about what have happened to your life that which if you think with this lens, you believe you could do or you would have done different. Or just go out and study and be inspired of sort of countless other examples that you can sort of fit it into this framework. And hopefully collectively with what I have shared and the examples that all of you would share, we will be able to move one step forward. Be in charge. We cannot fundamentally reprogram our brains work, but we can understand how it works, where it works well and where it is challenge. And then being aware can make us think about situations differently. And that's a great recipe to increasing the probability of success. Thank you very much. Loved having this conversation. I'll come back with an episode 2 with an interesting story very soon. In the meantime, enjoy and take care.